Hello, Rod Peppiatt from the Avenue Uniting Church in Blackburn, Victoria, meeting on Wurundjeri country. Today we follow from last week's reflection, which was on the very first part of Matthew chapter 5, the part that we talk about as the Sermon on the Mount of Jesus' conversation with his disciples. Today we pick up from Matthew 5:13, which immediately follows on those statements that we call the Beatitudes, the blessings, blessed are those who mourn, the like. Beginning at verse 13 of Matthew 5. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hidden. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter, will pass from the law until all is accomplished. As I said, today we follow where the lectionary has led us these last few weeks and follow Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, or the teachings known as the Sermon on the Mount. In the first part of that reading, Jesus uses powerful images of salt and light in what he describes, in how he describes what it means to live according to the ways of God's realm. The same images of salt and light are used in the Hebrew scriptures to describe covenant and law. And King David and his descendants are called a lamp before God. So Jesus continues this message found in the scriptures in what is a very important part of why Matthew writes, to sort of show Jesus as part of the heritage of the great King David. Here in this story, Jesus tells his followers that at this very moment they are salt, cleansing, preserving, adding flavour. At this moment, he says, they are light, revealing what is hidden, allowing all to see. God's reign is not only future promise, it is also present reality as far as Jesus is concerned. And we participate in that reign as we live according to the ways of God. Our light should shine before others, he said, so not so that they can applaud our piety or congratulate us on how good we are, but so that our works can help each other and those around us attend to the life of God, the light to all the house, as Jesus puts it. The word that's translated here, though, as house, is the word for the established world. It's a big house. Now, the salt and the light images are fairly straightforward ones for discipleship, and they're helpful to explore and practice. But excuse me, but then we have what is quite an abrupt shift in Jesus' thinking as Matthew's story tells it. He goes from these nice kind of pleasant images to, don't think that I've come to abolish the law. Now, where does that fit with what's gone before? Or does it fit? I think it does. For Jesus, and later for Matthew, this was about how one was to be salt and light as faithful Jews. And we remember that Jesus was born, lived and died as a faithful Jew. He was a Jewish reformer. And for him, when you think about how we're to live in faithfulness, it involved faithfulness to the law. Firstly, though, it meant remembering what the law was. For Jews in Jesus' day, the law, or the Torah, was understood as the whole content of God's revelation to the people. And for them it was contained in contained in the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures. The law included the 10 Commandments and many other regulations that governed community life. But crucially, it was more than that. It was the story of God's covenant, God's relationship, God's agreement with the people. The law, L-O-R-E, if you like, as opposed to L-A-W. The L-A-W followed the L-O-R-E. The rules never stood in isolation from the story. A great example of this is in the 10 Commandments as they're recorded in Exodus. They don't actually begin with the first commandment. It doesn't start with "thou shalt not." It actually starts with, "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of slavery in the land of Egypt." And then it goes on and says, "These things are how we shall live in the light of that." The prophets that came after the Torah were convinced that God's action was the context for the rules, and that the rules were about living in proper relationship with God, with others, and with creation. And Jesus agreed. He's accused by the scribes and the Pharisees, the religious leaders. He's accused by them of not keeping God's law or the letter of it. But he is faithful to the law's intent. He comes not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. His call to followers is to live righteous lives, showing justice and mercy to all. We might hear echoes of Micah 6 there. What does the Lord require but to do justice, to love kindness, and walk humbly with your God? Jesus calls people to go to the heart of God's law, fulfilling the spirit of it, not just the obligations, if you like. I'm reminded here of Marcus Borg and John Dominic Crossan's suggestion that perhaps we understand the call to be holy as God is holy as be compassionate as God is compassion. They suggest that that's the key to understanding the LAW, understand the LORE, understand the story. Those who break God's law, it says, and teach others to do so are least in God's realm, according to Jesus in Matthew's Gospel. We are not banished from God's way, but we need to be changed, to change, and to be restored into right relationship. The concern of the scribes and Pharisees was obedience to the law, LAW, as they understood it, every little bit. We might suggest that they were missing the point, but I think we need to acknowledge their sincerity. They earnestly believed what they were imposing on others was the way of God. As I said, Jesus was a Jewish reformer, and his followers, his disciples, as far as he was concerned, needed to be as wholehearted about following the intent and the spirit of the law as the regulation or obligation of it. Jesus called them and us to live lives of righteousness, the ethical actions expected of those who believe and follow his way. For him to be salt, to be light, is about honouring the regulation of the law by attending to its spirit. Elsewhere in Matthew and other Gospels, we read things like, "You have heard it said," says Jesus, "but I say to you." There's a number of those statements. And in each of those cases, which illuminate what we're looking at here, Jesus pushes his disciples to go beyond simply knowing the rule, to consider the humanity behind it, to hear the sacred intent. And that's particularly true when people are manipulating or using the law to gain power and gain over other people or to manipulate others. And with each of those kinds of statements, you know, the ones that say, "But I say to you," he seems to say, I think, something like this. If you can understand the law to mean that you can treat someone disrespectfully or dismissively or unjustly, then you have misunderstood the law. It's not that the law needed changing in his view, but the way people understood and lived within it as faithful Jews. Now clearly we as non-Jewish people have a different relationship to the law. But since it's part of our spiritual inheritance and story, we too need to attend to its spirit. Where are the challenges for us in responding to the Sermon on the Mount and the story, the law which lies beneath it? If we are to go beyond a passive understanding that simply says God will fix things, then this is a really important question. How might we be the means through which peacemakers find peace, through which mourners are comforted, through which merciful people seek mercy, through whom the meek inherit the earth? Where does the world need salt and light right now? How might we be that salt and light? And how are we doing so already? I think these verses, these images, present us with a wonderful invitation. Let's allow them to encourage us to work where we can and as we can, that in us the world may see a glimpse of God. In the name of the Holy One, in whom we live and move and have our being. Amen. Blessings.